We are live with Asia, and I've watched Asia on the Imagination podcast. Shout out to them again. Heartbreaking story, folks. So viewer discretion is advised. But what a brave lady! What a phenomenal speaker as well. She did about 3 hours on the Imagination podcast. So I'd urge people to watch that one as well. All of Asia's links, if you want to support Asia's important work, are in the description box below this video. I'll just give a quick summary. A survivor of SRA, mind control, Mormon rituals, whistleblower, life coach, mother, silversmith, jewelry maker, entrepreneur, public speaker, seminar host, podcast host of her own podcast, Letters to the People, and a woman on a mission to educate people of the realities of ritualistic trauma. So a huge thank you for coming on, Asia.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it, Sean.
Yeah, we were speaking a bit beforehand. My viewers, they like a story in the order it happened in your life. So if you take them on that journey, so let's go back to start. Where did you grow up?
I grew up I was born and raised in Utah. However, with that, there was a lot of moving that happened. So I had some young years in Los Angeles, in the Pasadena area, West Covina area. And so before I was five years old, I had some back and forth between Utah and California. And then the growing up, I would say until I was in ninth grade, I was in the Utah area, but there were multiple moves between Salt Lake, Bountiful, and Ogden. A lot of abuse happened in Ogden. That was a 5th grade to 9th grade era. And that was a very interesting era because I was aging into a different phase of the way the cult, the brotherhood, this dark underground actually uses their victims. So that became a very interesting phase, and we can go into that. And from there, I moved to Texas, where there was a particular event and mission that our family was sent there to set up. And then after that, I moved to Wyoming, and I went to high school in Wyoming, and we lived in Riverton. It was there's a reservation out there, and I understand that there's a tunnel system that ends or has an opening in that area as well. So there was some activity there, and that's where I graduated high school. So after I was done there, then I got a scholarship to college down in Cedar City, and I took that and then transferred up to the University of Utah, where I got my degree. So there's some moving around that happened. And when I share that with people, a lot of times they're like, "Oh, was your dad in the military?" And I'm like, "No, we just did a lot of moving." So growing up, I'm going to claim Utah, but there are these other locations that get sprinkled in there, and time spent in that area. So
all right, let's go back over this slowly then.
Okay.
So who were your parents and how did they meet?
So ironic. So I want to back it up even further before my parents. So
yes, please
I was raised in the LDS church, the Mormon church. And I'm making a very specific melding here because for some people, especially with the way the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints presents themselves, over the last few years, they've gone through iterations of really owning the word Mormon, we're Mormons, and then rejecting the word Mormon and choosing into we're LDS, we're the Latter-day Saints, we're the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like, it's a mouthful, but it's a specific mouthful. It's a very clear identifier. Now they've kind of gone back into, now that there's a new prophet, president of the church, it is being shifted away from, or it's integrating the Mormons. And so some people like to tease it apart and they want to, split hairs over this, but I've got to be really clear that back in the day when all of this was going on with me, we were Mormons, and you were known as the Mormon church. And I know that the church actually used that to their advantage, because most people, when they think about the Mormon church, wonder a few things. The first thing is they think about Mormon missionaries. So these are the youth, specifically the young men that are going around with the black tags on their white shirts, and they're knocking on the doors, and they're proselyting, and there's young women that do that as well. And it was through this program that my parents met. That's why I'm bringing that in. So back when they were young, they were both missionaries in Germany, and they met in Germany. When they came home, they reconnected and got married. Technically, it's important also to know with this, it's a generational thing. So most of my abuse, most of my introduction happened with my dad's side of the family. There were some things that I remembered with my mom's, but not necessarily as pronounced as everything else that was on my dad's side of the family. And that's how I got funneled up into the higher levels of the church itself. So they met on their mission, and in my dad's side of the family, my grandmother, my grandfather, aunts, uncles, cousins, great aunts, like it just had its history. And both of my parents were actually the oldest children in their family, and I'm the oldest. So I was the oldest of two oldest, which gave me a particular value or title, I guess, that was also utilized to be the oldest child, especially of two oldest children in this organization, is notable. So my dad, when I was born in Provo, Utah, and my dad was going to BYU. And living there, there were a number of things that when you're born into this group, things often happen at birth, because there is a playbook for the mind control, the MK Ultra, and also the introduction, the grooming, the normalizing of things that need to happen even early on. And so as an infant, I had experiences that were really violating and grooming and training with that. And so being in that area gave my family access, because my dad's side of the family was living in Salt Lake at the time. My mom's side of the family was up in the Clearfield, West Point area, and we were kind of easily able to go visit them. One of the things that I remember as an infant was one of the ways my grandmother would actually start. This is my dad's mom, would create or utilize and access me and have time, was like changing my diaper. And so if I was crying, or if I was upset, or even if I wasn't, and my mom was in the room holding me, or I was on, in a blanket or whatever, if it was time to change my diaper, then my grandmother would say, "Oh, don't you worry about it. You just stay there. You rest. I'll pick her up. I'll take care of her." And so then she'd take me back into the bedroom where she would change the diaper. And with that exercise, there would be, just by her putting her finger in me, and then there would be some very ugly energy that would be coming out. So even as an infant, there's words and energy that would be taken in. And so naturally, some, babies cry, like they don't really like necessarily to be exposed or whatever. But one of the things that she would do is get like rubbing alcohol and put it on a cotton ball, and then rub it on my skin, and especially in those delicate areas where that would sting a lot. So heightened attention and focus would be down in those areas, in my vaginal area, in my that area there between my legs, right? And you're totally exposed. You're that's just what happens. And so there would also be occasionally, like this, there'd be a fan by the bed, like a smaller fan or whatever. So to blow air on that area would also increase like temperature change. So you're having a lot of like stimulation and different things such as cold and heat. And at the same time, that rape would be happening. And then there would be things like, why are you here? You're no good. Nobody wants you. And so the focus would be right here. In the meantime, I'm crying. So what my mom would be hearing in the other room is just me crying, which in the association of, oh, she doesn't want her diaper changed, there's no reason to go in and check that out, right? There's no reason to even come. And there's also, like appropriate timing. So it wasn't necessarily that I was back there an extreme amount of time. It was just that I was being taken care of in, like what was supposed to be a normal way. In addition to that, there would be other diaper changing moments where I would get, I would get slapped. And so now you've got the rubbing alcohol, the intensified feelings, and then just to get slapped like that. So now, in addition to other things, there's going to be that kind of stimulation and that kind of, I don't even want to say injury, but, being spanked is really, really like painful. So to exacerbate things, then that would happen. And she'd finished changing my diaper, and there was a time that she did that, and she walked out, and I'm still crying because I'm still hurting. And she said to my mom, you know what, I'm just going to take her for a drive, get her to calm down. I'll put her in the car. And she did. So we went for a drive, and where we went was not very far away. She went to her sister's house, to my great aunt's house. And this is where I had a lot of memories as far as family happens. So in that space, in that place, she showed up and she said, we need to teach this one a lesson. And so I'm still an infant, and there would be other things that would be happening as far as you're not wanted. Can't say beatings necessarily, because they can't, like slapping is one thing where you're going to have, like marks left on you, like red marks and that kind of thing. So if they can keep it in the diaper area, if they can keep it to where you're not really going to be there, nothing's going to be discovered, then that's something that would happen. And ice baths would be one of the things that would happen. So there's just a lot of, again, like stimulation, tactile things being left, again, put in this cold water, left out on, like exposed on a table, and then having a fan blowing on me. Just techniques like that. And then the separation from warmth, from my mother, from what I was used to, was also being like compartmentalized. So starting the splitting doesn't necessarily mean anything like you have to witness something gory and bloody. Starting the splitting happens with these different ways that you can affect an infant. And I want to also put in here too that from the memories that I've recovered, sometimes it seems really unbelievable, because there's an infant, they're nonverbal, they're just still, like there's different things about being young that people want to understand or they want to discredit, either one. And it's a little bit unbelievable that an infant can have a memory, that kind of thing. And that's actually very true. It's true that you can have memories. It's true that you're taking in that energy and you're pulling in all of your physical experience through a physical body. And it's still stored. It's still actively in that system, in your system, in your psyche, and in a developing brain. And so normalcy, things that are becoming normal or normalized, are some of the things that they actually focus on, your brain stem. So that's one of the things that they did. I was blessed. So in the Mormon religion, when a baby is about 3 months old, typically, they bring the infant into church and then give it what they call a name and a blessing. So the men who hold the priesthood in the religion, that's what they call it, they will take the child or the infant up in front of everybody. They create a circle, and then the father, typically, if he's worthy, that's always a caveat, will give the baby a name and a blessing. And all of the men have their hands like supporting or underneath this baby. And the blessing is said. And, you know, it's just kind of like, here she is. She's part of this group. One of the things the church does also is record, not necessarily the blessing, but at some point, the individual, the child, is recorded in the records of the church. So every individual that is a member of the church, and even ex-members, but if you're on record as a member of the church, you have a number. And the number, it follows you everywhere. So early on, the minute you're born, once this, you know, I can't even say if it starts with the blessing or if they just, you know, the parents are like, hey, here's the baby. We have a new child. That name and number are then connected to the parents and the family line, and they already have records of everything anyway. So they're collecting this information and they're numbering everybody. So just keep that in mind as a sideline of how they're able to track so many things, is because everybody has a number. So if you think that just because you leave the church or just because you feel like you don't want to go anymore, you're still able to be tracked, because they have a tracking system, and it's a very, you know, it's a very old one. They've been using that for a very long time. So in the memory that I had of being blessed, it was not in front of the church. The one that I remembered when I first started recovering memories was in this great aunt's house. And I feel like what I did is I kind of woke up into a room where the energy, again, was different. The surroundings were different. It was dark. There were people that were hooded, that were veiled. There was black candles. There was, anyway, blood. There were things like that were set up around this infant me. And if I recall, I know that there were candles set up in a particular way, and they set up a pentagram that they would, you know, that I was placed on. And those symbols can be created any way they want. You know, you can draw it on something or dispose of it, or they could have something that is, you know, like a relic or something that's very important to them that they just bring out when they're doing these things for the family. And that was the main blessing. That blessing happened prior to anything that would happen in church. And I was being marked with blood. And I don't recall the words that were there specifically, because there was more on the chanting side of things, but it was more a dedication to the family and to the family line. And so that was an anchoring that began early on for me in that method, in that way. And it would be interesting because we would visit this great aunt's house. And I remember when I was about 2.5, 3, something like in between there was a time that I was taken, and the way they did this was really interesting, because not all the women in the house were supposed to be aware that this was happening. So I was outside with a couple of cousins, and even, you know, just being young like that, there was an adult present, you know, and I was lured back to this other area, kind of back by a garage, and picked up, this sounds really weird, but I was picked up and put in kind of like a carpet bag, like something bigger than a bowling bag, but I was put in a bag, right? And the men were supposed to go bowling. And so I was put in this case, small enough to be in this case, so it would fit a small child, right? And I was just a toddler, and there was a car waiting out front. So I think one of the guys had already backed the car out, and he was sitting there waiting. And it was one of my uncles, or it was my dad that was driving. And they got in the car, and there was only the 3 of them, and they drove up to this area in Salt Lake that is a designated building. I don't think it still is, but it was a designated building for for evaluations. And so in that building, the I was delivered to some men that wanted to purchase me, and these men were in not quite yet in the leadership, in the like high leadership of the church, but they were there. They were in the process of that line. And I was like inspected. It was really weird. They're looking at my teeth. They're looking at my eyes. They wanted to, I don't know if they needed to take a blood sample at that moment because they already had all of that from being born. Right. And so it was just, is she under the training? How well is she being trained? And there was a purchase that happened. They actually received an exchange for that commitment. Like, yes, she's approved, and yes, we're going to bring her into this now. And here's the promise. So the men gave my family some money for this, and I was now earmarked for some training through these higher groups. During all of this, or after that, then I was taken to a couple of ceremonies that were really terrifying and meant to terrorize. One of the ways that they did terrorize me specifically, I know there were other children there, but one of the ways they terrorized me was they had this really, and I'm going to say some things that seem like super, super elaborate. Like, it sounds really weird, but again, this was back in the 60s and 70s. So remember, as you're listening to this, that not only do they have the means, they have the money, they have the talent, and they have the desire to create elaborate sets, whether it's as big as a stage or whether it's a dedicated room. It doesn't matter. It is all created for the purpose of controlling people and creating this long dedicated line to actually Lucifer. It ends up going up to, the Lord, when they called Lord Lucifer. So in my experience too, and I'm just going to say this, Satan, Lucifer is interchangeable. It's the same. He was referred to in the same way at the same, all the same time. So if they ultimately, when they are talking about in these rituals about the Lord and you will worship the Lord, it was always about Lord Lucifer. And so in this one particular situation, I remember being on a disc, and the only way I can describe it, it was like, those discs that are kind of sleds. If you get on, as you're sliding down the snow, it's about that size. And it was designed because it doesn't have a flat bottom. It was put on a pedestal, but it was also, because of that, it was very unstable. And this, I believe I was 3 years old, and you can feel that instability. And in addition to it, I was drugged. And there was a terrifying buildup for this. So I was actually brought in on this tray as a innocent child, as an offering. And it was kind of like, I think it was like a springtime thing, because there were flowers around, and the women had been, there were women and men in this ceremony, in this ritual. And the women were like, had put some flowers around me. And again, I was drugged. I was just kind of sitting there really, really dozy, but enough that I could still sit up. And it was a spring ritual, and it did have to do with regenerating, or a regenerative kind of blood ceremony. And in this ceremony, there was something where the women would they were offering menstrual blood. So whether they were currently menstruating or not, there was a collection. And that was also eventually kind of poured in there, but it was a little bit later in the ceremony where they had collected enough for something like that to happen. And I was being presented in this room to Lord Lucifer. So they were doing this spring rite where the men were dominating and did have dominant power, but the submission and offering had everything to do with the women that were being offering their the blood that was used, or represents birth and life and things like that. So my part in this was to be offered and presented, and then this blood was poured around, and there was, again, chanting, and there were words that were focused not necessarily on me, but on the group. And the group was present, willingly present for this rededication or this celebration, or I guess it's a celebration because it turned into an orgy for this spring kind of like rite that was happening. I wasn't there necessarily as a sacrifice, but as a representation of innocence. And innocence needed to be part of it because the orgy was going to lead into a different kind of blood sacrifice that I wasn't present for. But the thing that was really, really frightening to me was the way I was put on this pedestal, and the instability of it just really freaked me out. And before, like the volume of the chanting and the volume of the yelling and the calling in and the calling down, it's always done in a manner to bring in demonic forces that are beyond them. And so the offering isn't just like, look, here's our blood and here's an innocent child. It is, here are our bodies, please inhabit us. And that does actually happen, and it gets really frenzied, and that energy is definitely present. Being strapped down was also part of it. So I wasn't just sitting there placidly and feeling honored, although that is a really, really common pattern where you come in confused and calm, perhaps, maybe even adored, and then from there it's you get terrorized. So that happened about 3, and there were other things that were happening intermittently between all of that. Now, around that time is when we moved back to California, and in California, I remember one specific incident that tended to last over a number of visits, I guess is what you would say. And there was I knew it as a preschool. I think I was, I want to say 4 or something like that. And there was a preschool, and what I remember most about this preschool is there was a star on the building, and the star reminded me of a sheriff's badge. And it was confusing, but kind of just notable. Whenever I would go to these places, I was always given some Kool-Aid or some Red Punch or something to eat, something before that too, and give me this drug. And in this particular space, it wasn't church related. This was more conditioning, and I guess I was enrolled in this because of our family's connections to things, and it was just part of the training. And the training in here, there were children clearly that were together, and most of what happened seems to have happened in on either a lower level or in a back area. But it seemed really like kind of I don't want to say the full length of the building, but kind of the length of the building. And we would be put in these situations that would seem normal for preschool, and then they would start them out as games, and we would be trained and taught with things like knives and scissors. And there was one point where all of the training would go back and forth between terrorizing and soothing, meaning, rewarding, and terrorizing and rewarding. And the thing that is important to remember about these setups is that not all of the children were going to go home. And that's because not all of the children had a home. The children, like I did, I was going to be picked up, but there were other children that were there and as a member, it's kind of like you don't necessarily know where anybody else comes from. They just happen to be there. So, apparently you're just thinking, like this happened like it did with me. Parents dropped him off. Here's his child. So we were paired up with the Expendables, and I didn't know that, he was expendable at the moment. And we were tied, our wrists were tied together. I mean, we're holding hands, and we had these hands tied together. And then what they did was they actually tested us in basically combat. And the crescendo of what we had to do was to keep ourselves alive by killing the other child. And that, like I said, that took a few days to get to that point where we could remember what we were told. And every single time there was a terrorizing by the people that were there. There was a terrorizing just through the training itself for each of us individually. And to be selected is kind of something I also want to bring up. You're always off balance. You're always off, and what do I want to say, off base in your emotional state, because even if one of the people, one of the adults, is approaching you in a very aggressive way, and they're like, saying things that, you're going to be punished and we're going to grab you, that doesn't mean that they're coming at you. So this is what the instability and the confusion and the terror does, is because if he was coming at me and he suddenly shifted to the child next to me, that not only terrorized the child, who was actually very expendable, and whatever it was they were going to use, that situation for, but it's terrorizing everybody else to be like, oh, this is very unpredictable. Like, it looks like he's going one direction, but he could change at any moment. And even in the trainings of, positivity, and you're such great kids and good job and look at you learning, and then all of a sudden, but you're stupid, like they don't even have to necessarily have a reason to change, but the shift can be so abrupt that it just jars a child internally. And it's the same thing for an adult. It's confusing. You feel like you're doing a good job in something, and out of the blue, somebody's verbally, abusing you or whatever. And it's just kind of like you're searching, what did I do? What did I do? What did I do? And so even as a child, what did I do to stay safe? What did I do to deserve this? Like, you're trying to find any reason that you can latch onto that makes it comprehensible, and it's not comprehensible. And they know that that's part of what this overarching playbook is. And it works so well with the psyche that even there, the dissociation is utilized and manipulated and exploited. And so in this particular situation, we had been trained on what to do with I don't want to say dummies, but we'd been trained on what to do. And remember also, there was other training in my world where I had already to this point witnessed some very gruesome murders, I guess. Yeah, it's the best way to put it, of infants and of children. And so I knew what that meant. It didn't mean that I wanted to be part of it, but it definitely meant that I didn't want to be part of it. I didn't want to engage. So we had this other training, and then we were tied together. And the thing that also happens is in the druggings, like, so you're in a space where you recognize it, and you're just like, oh no, where I'm here again. And there can be, and often is, an immediate dissociation. So you're dissociated, you're drugged, and then you're adrenalized in that there's another drug given to you, or it's a thing where you just like have an influence come in, and typically that's going to happen because you're given snacks and things like that. On top of that, there is then this arena kind of area where you can't step out of the circle, and then the adult is yelling at you, and the focus is on both children. And I want to say, I really honestly want to say that the other one, the little boy that was I was tied to, I want to say that maybe his version of drugging was different than mine. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, he would have been, he wasn't lethargic. He was just as like as crazed. Well, no, I was crazed. He was just as defensive as I was. But hearing the words and understanding that if you know, like, one of you is dying, one of you is dying. There's no way around this. And that had been demonstrated earlier. So we didn't question that. And it's awful, actually. I hate thinking it's awful. It's awful to think not just that you would put a child in that situation, but to be in that situation. You're not, you know?
It sounds absolutely terrifying, Asia. I cannot imagine the stress, the trauma.
Yeah, it was survive. It really was. And you can't get out of it. And you're adhering to the rules. And one of the things that you're taught really early on is to obey. Obedience is the highest form of respect. Obey, you stay safe. And so just even this idea of knowing that that's there, and there is a circle, and you have to stay in the circle, right? And you have to like do this, you have to have this fight. You have to have this fight to the death kind of idea. My brain's not thinking, well, what if I just step out? Like, you're not pushing back with something as simple as that, right? The idea that where I was like, I got to survive. It wasn't, I need to kill this boy. It was like, I need to survive. And here's the rules and the methods. And previously, I got to say, it was demonstrated to us that if a child was not compliant, and if somebody didn't actually do what they were doing, the adult stepped in and did it for them and with them. Here's your hand. We're going to do this, right? So it's clear that none of this was going to, like, there's no truce. And so in this particular situation, I won, I lived, but it was horrendously terrifying. However, in addition to the terror was this incredible amount of rage for the adults, for what was going on. And they play on that too. It's not like they don't know that this is what's going on inside of you biologically. Plus, they've added drugs that they're very, very clear on how they're going to affect a child and how long the dosage is going to last, and then what enhances what. So I honestly felt like I was crazed. Like, I was just like, it came on, and it was more and more and more. And then having that yelling, at what you're supposed to do. And, like, kind of, it was just confusing, but it was also like, he had a knife too. and I was not going to let that go. Like, I had to defend myself. So ultimately there was fighting. And again, like I said, I feel like they drugged us differently so that I had more an advantage, but I also had training even prior to that, just some other kinds of trainings with weapons. And I had seen things demonstrated that I had witnessed. And so I don't know that this other little boy had such extensiveness in it. And again, it was just, I'm 4, right? Learning for that age is all the child does up until the age of 6 or 7. It's it's about bringing in and sponging in your surroundings to learn, because that's the way your brain is. It's actually, focused. It's like, how do I do this? What am I learning? I'm going to explore my surroundings. I'm going to, test and try things. And so it's a very crafted and well-designed process that a lot of these children go through that are in this mind control system. And I also want to give the overlay, and you can, I think this is easily looked up. I was born in 1966, so now we're into 1970. And the MK Ultra program, was happening in the 50s, around that area, so it's gotten more formalized with the church, and the letter companies that are part of the government began to the letter companies saw the commodities of the church, and they wanted those commodities. That's about the best way to put it. And the commodity would be the people, the membership. And if you think about it, they're trying to find and create spies that are easily adaptable, easily trained. So when you have people that are going on missions to foreign countries, and they are immersing themselves and living there and presenting in one particular way, if they have this in their background, it is, and again, obedience is really, really part of it. Most, if not all of the people don't even have their own sense of self. They have the sense of self that has been programmed or given to them with a little bit of sprinkling of their own personalities. The social pressure to stay in line with the community, the church, the socialization of that is intense. And so a lot of that is a really, really attractive commodity to the CIA, to the spy builders, right? Where they're just saying, okay, we have this group of people who are already used to obeying authority. You present yourself as an authority, and then you promise them something on the other end of it, you'll have them. Especially if you make them think that this is their own idea, and that this is really like an honor, which is going to be part of it, right? So now they've got their own willingness to step into it, which is a big deal in the Luciferian part of the church, because they put us in these situations of children, where they're continually telling us that we did it, or that we agreed, and that we're part of it, and we're just like them. And so you can have a part that feels at least camaraderie, and you also have a part that feels incredibly trapped. And depending on what's being pulled forward or coming forward, pulled up, you're going to have something to access, whether you feel trapped or whether you feel part of the family. And so in this situation I'm kind of describing, there's a trapped animalistic energy, like within, that is actually coming forward, plus having the drugging, plus being encouraged, plus raging. It's fascinating to actually recognize that in all human beings we have this scope of emotion, and that rage can be experienced as a very, very young child, and it's part of it. And then it's also being curated. It's very weird, but it's true, having an emotion curated such as that. So while we were in, so the way this ended up is the little boy did, I won. It was gory, it was gruesome. It didn't just end with that. The adult came in and made sure that the process was complete. And there were other children that had to do the same thing. And if I remember correctly, I think they had multiple, kind of like an arena, like, what do I want to say? Gladiator style kind of idea, where I had my circle, there was another circle. So there was even more noise and chaos. It wasn't like everybody was around watching just us. There were other things going on. So I think there were 3 circles. So this was going on with 6 different children, and there were other children watching, and they, so the whole thing was awfully crazed and crazy. And to watch a dead child dragged off it's awful. It's and just even trying to like take that in, plus work through your own adrenaline system, where you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so worked up. I don't even know that there was any kind of, okay, I'm safe, because that wasn't next, because the whole room was full of threat. And so the way any of this ends is with a bunch of words. Look what you did, look what you done, celebrate one thing and then condemn the other. So all of that's going on. And then in this really weird way, the next thing after they kind of complete the situation, I'm not even saying tidy up, I'm just saying they complete it. Then in walks, a woman, or, somebody that, we're familiar with. And she's like, okay, nap time. And we just get shuffled off for nap time. And so you're jarred out of one and put into another. And as you're actually walking away from that, relief is there. Your system's being drained and you're exhausted. Plus you're given like, here's your milk, or here's your treat, go lay down. So that when you wake up, that didn't happen. That was a different part of your world. And you wake up into something else and you get picked up and you're taken home. And if there was reinforcement that needed to be done from that, then the parents would have been, whoever the handler is, would be given the instructions on how to reinforce that. That didn't seem important for me to get as far as a memory goes. So I don't know that particular experience or training needed reinforcement outside of just regular stuff at home. And when I say regular, it was like, I don't know, whatever, like reinforced later in other ceremonies, reinforced later with just even, witnessing things like that would happen on the farm. There's one thing that I remember as a teenager that really, really, really bothered me. And it just seems kind of inconsequential, but it's popping in now. So I'm going to mention it. So my mom was raised on a dairy farm, and she was the oldest of 11 children. And my youngest uncle, my youngest two uncles, I was closest in age to. I was only 5 years younger than my youngest one. So I had a very interesting viewpoint of that kind of life, not having to be the one that had to work because I was the grandchild, but watching my uncles have to do the men's work in certain things. Anyway, there was this, there's calves and there's cats and there's animals and all kinds of stuff. So there's chickens and things like that. Well, I remember one day my grandpa came up to my youngest uncle and he said, we've got a sick cat and you need to get rid of it. And the cat wasn't sick lethargic. The way it was like sick, kind of like crazed, like weird. It was acting weird. That's the way I remember seeing it. I'm not assuming or saying anything. It's just, he had to take care of this cat. So he asked me if I wanted to go with him to take care of the cat. And I didn't know what that meant. So I said, yes, of course I want to do it. Anyway, he shot the cat and then he threw it in the back of one of the big work trucks that, like it was the kind that had a dump bed on the back. And we drove it out into the field, like out to the back of the fields. And he raised the dump bed and the cat slid out and fell on there. And I remember looking in the window in the back and there was just this blood streak and every part of me was just absolutely triggered by that. And, and then we drove, that was kind of farm life, but that was one of those things that in my life immediately popped into seeing other blood streaks, seeing other things like that, and not really understanding or knowing or even being able to like regulate myself. It was just shaking. It was just me shaking. And I don't, my cousin, like I said, I was young. Maybe I was 10 or something like that. He's 15-year-old. He's not going to pay attention. Right. So for some reason that these two are like just popping in, and I wanted to share that everyday life situations are also used to drive in the programming and will also trigger the programming. And it's something that could be, like completely unrelated, such as that. However, I will say, I did have other things that happened with cats, and that would be directly related to it. There was a time that the family itself, we had a family reunion, and this is where I started to get into trouble. And before I get to that, let me back up. I got to back up to one other thing when I was 5, and then I'll get to the family reunion. So I'm still living in Salt Lake City. I'm now going to elementary school, kindergarten, first grade area. And remember, I've already been purchased by the church, the higher ups in the church. And when I say higher ups, what I'm going to say is, just for people to understand the structure. In the LDS church, there is the prophet and 2 counselors. That equates to a president and 2 vice presidents. And then under them are what they call the 12 apostles. So again, the board of directors, the 12. Okay. And then under them, then there's what they call the 70s. And they have different people that fill in different areas and area authorities. And so it goes down like a pyramid in scope, in breadth and scope. And so not only do you have families that are monitoring internally, you have, and handlers, you have members of wards of congregations, and it's called a ward. So the congregation, you have members in the congregation that are also monitoring each other, knowingly and unknowingly. And so then as it goes up the scale, there's people that are monitoring, there's people that are handling, there's people that know. Anyway, so as you get up higher, there's a lot of people that don't want to think that the church itself is involved, but I'm here to tell you, not only are they involved, they're also part of the design. And yet there are those that are even above the highest members in this church. So they are also taking direction from earthly, they take direction from Lucifer, right? That's their main god. They get the direction that way. But then there are those that are not inside the church that are also giving them structure. So it's a hierarchy even beyond the church. The church is part of it, and it is a well-oiled machine. It's a really, really well-organized organization that has developed now to the point where I am of the opinion that the entire leadership is involved in the application, understanding, design, and participation of this kind of activity. Back when I was young and participating on a fairly regular basis with the these higher members of the church, which include, the general authorities and a few prophets. I don't know, because I don't have personal experience seeing all of them, but I do know that I have personal experience with enough of them that I would say, if you're an organization that is a corporation that is designed to benefit the corporation and rule and, rule their people, how do I want to say this? Actually, just manage their commodity. You're not going to invite in or put into a high position somebody that is not part of this plethora of people you could pick from to be in these higher positions. And the church itself has its own royalty, its own royal system, its own bloodline, and it's fairly well recognized within even membership right now. It's like there is this, pseudo or outright, I guess, worship of a lot of the leadership, and they've groomed the members to get to that point by putting themselves in front of them, kind of like the Pope and the cardinals. Like, we are the way you communicate with God, and God has told us, here's the structure. This is how you stay in line. And there's really no reason to question that, because it's easy. If I was going to really dial it in and say, ultimately, what's difficult? Your own spirituality and knowing yourself and working and walking your own path. It's easy. Somebody giving you a formula and you just checking the boxes and saying, I did good and I did this. And now I can hold this over God's head because I did what his prophet told me I was supposed to do. So when I die at the last days or whatever kind of thing, then God can't like get rid of me or scorn me or put me into, you know, someplace other than where he is, because I followed the rules. I did the thing. And that's the promise, right? So it's a very seductive promise, and it doesn't encourage any like really critical thinking outside of that, because again, in human nature, it's easy. You're going to be looking for an easy path, and you don't know. You personally do not know how and what path. Like, we're trying to discover ourselves all the time, right? And so then you get somebody coming in and say, ooh, you know what, you might not be on the right path. You're going to go, what do I do? How do I do it? Like, show me. So that's a whole different kind of mental thing. But anyway, I was involved with this group, and there was a way that I was formally inducted into this higher group, and it was through a television program. Some people may remember this, but it was called Romper Room. So back in the early 70s, and you can look this up, you can get on YouTube and look who Miss Julie is. So I think it was a PBS program in and the children would be screened, and it was basically in Utah. I'm not going to speak for anywhere else because this is my experience, is just Utah. The children were screened while they were on this program. And so you were on the program for 2 weeks, every day for 2 weeks. And Miss Julie, it was a half an hour. She would be the hostess, and she would have this group of, I think it was 6 children. And it was all around like singing songs and, you know, doing good things and being what they call the good doobie. So they have a little bumblebee, and you're going to do what the bee says. So I'm doing the good, and I'm a good little doobie, right? And so I got a certificate afterwards. I can actually, I have it outside. I should have brought it in to show you. It's like, look, I have my certificate. I was a good little girl on Romper Room. Anyway, so they were recording this at KSL, and KSL is the local broadcasting station, and the church also owned it, and the church also owns, you know, Bonneville Broadcasting, which is the newspaper and the television station and, you know, the radio stations and stuff like that. So again, you're getting consumed by, or, you know, kind of flooded by what the church wants you to hear. So I'm on this program. I was recorded, and it's fascinating because this is one of the ways that children are tracked and monitored, is the way they interact with each other. So is somebody acting out? Is somebody shy? Is somebody angry? You don't necessarily need to have a formal program like that to discover that. All you have to do is walk into a preschool, and you can see how, you know, if you're there with any consistency, you can see personalities of children. Children don't have a reason to hide any of this. And so by screening this, I was on for a week, and the children that were ahead of us were there. It's kind of like, you're there for a week with the other ones that were there the prior week, and then they kind of go off, and we're there to kind of, you know, so we were on there rotating for 2 weeks. And Thomas S. Monson was the general authority, and he wasn't a general authority yet, I don't think. You know, I think he was, actually. I'm going to take that back. But he was the one that actually was screening that, and that's the way he chose me. Like, I was known in that group. I had my number. There was my name. I have a file, all of that stuff. But then to witness the child, it was like, I want her. And it had a lot to do with maybe the way I was interacting, what my file was, and the way I looked. He liked the way I looked. And so because I was picked that way, that changed the way I was now introduced to that group. So I was, they would call my dad, who was my handler, and I would be delivered to ceremonies, or I would be delivered to the church administration building, where I would be taken into the front office and then taken up the elevator. And my dad was not allowed to go any further than the main entry. Up the elevator where Monson would pick me up. And then in that, where the offices are, I would be in his office with him. And there was a lot of things that I witnessed, just the interaction with the men. There were times I did see other children. I saw through my years of being in these, like at one point he's like, come on, we're going to go for a ride. Right. And went down into the lower levels of and by the way, I got to say that the campus of where the temple is like Temple Square itself, where Hotel Utah, they call it the Joseph Smith Memorial Building now. The Alta Club that's across the street, like this entire area, plus bigger, but this entire campus is all connected through tunnels and levels. And so the church office building, which is different than the church administration building, the church office building goes down incredibly deep. Like it's subterranean, and there are levels down there that are subterranean that people who work at the church don't access. You have to have like special access to get where you do. And that's not unusual for the church. The big setup with the church is the temples. The way you get into a temple as any lay person is you have to have a temple recommend. Your number has to be on it. Your name has to be on it. You have to have a signature of your bishop and your stake president or a member of the stake presidency. And then that is how you can go in, present this, and they can say, sure, you can come in. There are so many ceremonies that are done in these temples, in these lower levels. I've had people that will argue with me. They'll say, well, how could that possibly be? They can't get in. You know, they have these cards. It couldn't be there. You have to be super, super righteous to get this temple recommend. And I, in a way, I just kind of smile about that, because I'm like, well, if you're part of the brotherhood, you don't have to, you get your own version of what it is. Maybe you walk through the front door. Maybe you walk through a back door. You can do both. Maybe you access the lower levels, probably. So I remember getting in the car. We went down to this lower level, got into his car. I remember it was a big black car. And I remember sitting in the back. He liked me to wear cute little frilly dresses and socks with lace around them and Mary Jane shoes. That's what he liked. And so that's the way I would go there. And I remember sitting in the back seat. I think it had I want to say it was red leather, but I just remember it's my legs sticking to it. I didn't like the car. I didn't like sitting in there because my legs were sticking to this leather. And we went and met with Dallin H. Oaks, who's currently the current prophet. And we were in a different office building, and there was some planning that was going on in this particular thing. And I was just there. I was just there as a companion, I guess to say. And that happened a few times where we would get in the car and go somewhere and come back. And part of all of that, I would say, is him having a trophy, him kind of putting it in people's faces in a way. And then just having the normalcy, like, oh, there's normal things that I do with this man. And then there were times that, we would go down to this lower level, and there was a particular it looked like a broom closet from the outside, just kind of very sterile, nothing exciting kind of door that had to be opened with a key. And he opened it up, and the room was a lot bigger than a broom closet, and it had a pentagram painted on the floor already. And in that room there were there were artifacts, and there were things that held that the spirit of that really dark energy. And I would be raped in there by him, just because it wasn't necessarily a formal ceremony. It was just for him. And it wasn't even, the ones that I remember there weren't necessarily even for a calling in of a demonic spirit where he's changing and yelling and all of that stuff. Not to say that wasn't present, because I would say it definitely was, but it was different than the bigger rooms and the deeper rooms and the layers of different places of the way the underground was set up. So I'm trying to think from there. I was going somewhere.
So how old are you right now in the story, Asia?
In this, I'm 5.
5. Okay.
The things, just kind of building up to 5 and building up to more of the trainings. One of the things that got reinforced before I was baptized. So the church baptizes their children when they're 8 years old. And before I turned 8 years old, I had a satanic, Luciferic baptism where it was, a formal creation where I was taken to a room. There were men there, and I was told to step into what was it? Kind of like a metal tub is what it was. One of those big metal tubs, kind of like a feeding trough kind of idea. And I was drugged. I had walked in with kind of a sheath on, and I stepped in and I was stripped of that. So I was naked, and they began to they started to pour blood on me. And the whole ceremony was around, you're being baptized to Lucifer, you're being baptized into the group, you are one of us, and this blood that is covering you can never be washed away. And that was again really familiar, the familiarity of the blood. In other ceremonies, the blood can't be washed away. The blood is there. It's the sins, your sins. It's our sins. We're putting them on you. You're our innocence. You're taking these sins for us. Now we have to kill you. And instead of killing me, I'm, quote unquote, rescued. And then there's this other child that gets killed instead. It just, again, keeps you off balance, all the time. But anyway, the blood was poured around me and it's dripping down me. And then they put this crown of thorns on my head. And they poured blood there. And so I'm just experiencing this entire thing that was a mockery of Jesus. And the point behind all of that was, you think you're being baptized to Jesus, whatever it is that you think you're going to be having, this is actually what happened to Jesus. And over and over and over again, it would be demonstrated that Jesus died, Jesus died, Jesus died. And on top of that was, and Lucifer is the one that lived. Lucifer is the one that never was killed. Lucifer is the one that let Jesus live when he was a baby, meaning the whole story about Herod, sending out, wanting to kill the babies, and babies were killed, but not Jesus. Well, that he was allowed to live was part of this story that, I was told often. And that ultimately there was not the storyline of the sacrifice for humanity was not what that is, because if he really wanted to save humanity, he would have stayed alive. He would have not been subject to death. He would not have died the way he did. And I have a very real, this happened a lot, but there was a very real experience in this baptism where they started telling me that not only was he, on the cross and suffering that way, but what really killed him was the sword. So, the story in the Bible, how a sword was driven through his side, and this idea that the sword is stronger than God. And the goal really of this entire situation, this entire group, and even beyond, is to dethrone God. And it is possible to dethrone God through the sword. And this is what they're demonstrating to me. And if God was going to actually save himself, he was going to, and he didn't. And it was Lucifer that enacted that had that happen. And even if they bring, if something gets brought up about, yeah, but he lived, the resurrection, that kind of thing, it's always countered with, no, he was killed first. Like, that doesn't matter. He actually died. And that was done through these dark energies, through Lucifer. So that was also part of it. And I was learning signs through that way. So they ran their hand, or like something on my left side, because I think that's where the sword went through. But anyway, they were touching there, and they were viscerally making, taking, helping me remember this death, and that this baptism was a permanent baptism, and that I was part of this group in a very permanent manner. And after that, then I needed to offer myself to the true Lord. And that was being represented by one of the men that had a headdress on, a mask kind of thing. And they called in Lucifer through that, and, the demonic, whatever. But then I have to be careful on this word here, but violated sexually. Okay. So, R is what happened to me at that point. And that was also part of that baptism. So what transfers over, the way they reinforced that at home, was on my birthday, the morning that I turned 8, or that night, kind of like into the midnight-ish hours. I remember that, so the rest of my family was drugged and that kind of thing, but my dad had this kind of travel, what do I say, travel altar, travel pat kind of idea. It was like something that he could take, and it looked to me like it was deer skin, like a deer hide kind of thing, and there was a pentagram painted on it, but he unrolled it, and in it were some candles and tools and, things like that were reminiscent of what I remember being a part of in this baptism. And it was a reenactment of the same thing without the blood. This was going to be, this was an incestual situation, but it was also a calling in of, it's your birthday, you're being, dedicated to this, and saying, this phrase about, I just want to be the first, or this, this is your, I'm saying first, happy birthday. And kind of later in life, I would get these phone calls and cards from him, even before, the day before my birthday or early in the morning. Hey, just want to be the first to, tell you happy birthday, kind of thing, which is a reinforcement of what was happening in the house at that time. And there was this grooming for him being my handler that was started. I mean, it was started before then, but really started to get formalized now that I was in this 8-year-old kind of area. And that focus of having a handler, having somebody there, and having this belonging to the cult, to the underbelly, to that group, gets reinforced at home often. So when I was baptized in the church, I didn't necessarily have any triggering, because there wasn't really anything to be triggered by, but I also internally had this very real awareness, or a part that was watching it, knowing that didn't matter. And one of the things that does happen as they go through these groomings psychologically is, because you're in such a horrendous setup in so many cases, you will not only trauma bond with the person that's saving you, your handler, but anything that creates relief. So anything that takes you out of that torture can create a trauma bond. And so it's a good time to actually help people understand that when you're healing from trauma, especially to a degree such as this, having this idea that you just need to reject or push away these feelings and thoughts doesn't do anything. Even having a casting out, like an exorcism or something like that. People feel like that's really going to be effective. And I can't speak to every case, but I can say from my own experience that it's a part of you. It's a personality. Remember, you get fractured and split, and you have different personalities, different parts, and different ages of those parts, right? And when you are in a high traumatized state, in a very well-constructed ritual situation where there's multiple people, multiple children, and more than one sacrifice, maybe even one sacrifice is all that's needed, but multiple sacrifices, those kinds of things. And there's torture, because that also adds to, you know, that energetic bringing in of those demonic forces, right? The possessions, the people opening themselves up to that possession. And I am going to say that when somebody's possessed, it doesn't mean they're they don't have their wits about them. They are actually removing themselves, and something that is in there does have its wits about them. So people running around totally crazy is a whole different, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about offering your vessel to a dark force to inhabit, especially, you know, to just participate and to, well, consume the terror, the energy, all of that stuff that is there. Okay, so when that happens, and there has been torture going on, when that happens, a lot of times this demonic force can come in, the torture ends, and so it is highly possible and very probable, again, speaking from experience, that you have a part that trauma bonds with the demon, trauma bonds with that energy, right? So an exorcism isn't necessarily going to work well, because you're not casting out, you might be casting out the demon, you might be casting out something, but you have a part inside that doesn't see that as bad. They see that as the relief from the trauma, relief from the fear, relief from the torture that was happening, even if it was momentary. And so I'll call it a friendship, could be formed, where if a child is feeling afraid again, it's possible to be opened up to what was relief at that one point, which is not God, can appear as an angel of light, but it's still not God. Does that make sense? Are you following me on this one?
Yeah.
So the complexities of what even happens within a person's psyche isn't fully known, and it's still a mystery, and the person's responsibility. It's your responsibility to understand yourself so well that you can actually discover if that's part of your story. And for me, it was. And it took me some healing to actually get to that and remember what happened and remember why, and that bond, and then negotiate even with that part and help that part of me see the difference between what that was and what truth is and who Jesus is, and that, you know, kind of thing. Because I do need to say that in these traumatic experiences, in addition to seeing the darkness and seeing demonic situations and things, and really high level satanic angels, you know, like that kind of stuff, I've also seen Jesus. I've also seen angels. And it is something that, whether you like it or not, I mean, the public has been trained to like really downplay this, mainly because if you don't really understand your spiritual side, and that we are living in a spiritual situation, a spiritual world that is also very physical, part of our evolution as human beings is to actually really embody in this physicality, get really material. Like, this is very material. We're very materialistic, and we connect with a lot of materialism and consume a lot of materialism. And the weight of that, just think about mass and energetics and stuff. The weight of that is very alluring, immediately rewarding, because it's, you know, immediate gratification and feedback, because that's how your body works, right? And it doesn't encourage or really speak to a spiritual side of things. You have to work on that. You have to be open to that. And you have to be in a space where you're very elementary at it, and it's going to be kind of confusing, kind of like, I'm still learning a new skill. Some of it's innate, some of it's not, but you have to work for it. And sometimes, often, the reward isn't quite as immediate. You need to have these experiences of making mistakes, that your discernment isn't quite on, your intuition is off a little bit, and those things are there to teach you, but you're not going to have the immediate density, like touch the fire and you get burned thing. This is different. And so if you think about being able to master or be very in tune with the physicality, and then, at a higher level, integrate the spirituality with the physicality, then you have somebody that are, like Jesus, that is actually has it all in one. And then life is really different. But we are so, like, trained and seduced to only look at and feel at where we are now, that this is where I believe the comments of, well, prove it to me. How do you know? Like, and then in the same genre, people are like, oh, we're fighting a spiritual war. We got to push back. We got to do all of these things. And I'm like, do you even understand spirituality? Like, if you're going to say this is a spiritual war, which it is, you've got to understand things happen on a spiritual level as well. So yes, you're going to have people talking about demonic forces, and yes, you're going to have them talking about angels, and you're going to have, like, angels of light that are actually demonic forces, that are appearing as an angel. You got to know the difference between the two. You're going to see Jesus. You're going to see other ascended masters. For some people, I interacted with Jesus. That's the one individual that I have my experience with, and there are a number of experiences with him.
And Asia, is that what helped you get out of this? Because everyone's on the edge of their seats right now. and the biggest question in the chat is, how the hell did you get out of this horrific situation?
Yeah, this is, I did not get out of this situation until I was an adult. So there is a thought that you age out of the system because these people are more on the PDF file preference. And what I want to say about that is, no, that's the training grounds. This is where you fracture children. This is where you train the adults. Yes, they're after the children. Yes, there are sick, awful things that happen specifically for children, with children, because there is a propensity and a preference for those kinds of sexual acts. However, you got to back up and you got to look at, what is our end goal? Again, we're so immediate that we think, oh my gosh, what's my 5-year plan? And we kind of get stumped, right? This is multi-generational, and this is, a couple hundred years. What are we going to be? What is it that our arcing goal is here? And when you get into the church, these men are looking at longer term things than what we even know. It's like investing, and what do we want to invest in, and what's our return going to be in the long game. And so when you start thinking about long game, you have to look at the training that the children go through, that turn into training that are youth, that turn into training and control as adults, which then makes it so you can get your marriage arranged, which happened to me, by somebody else in the group, so that you can then have more children that are already in a situation that they can be accessed by the grandparents or by the system, and without even any abuse at the house. You're still going to be socializing the children in a way that is easily accessible to members of the cult, right? The propensity is to access the mother so that you can then access the children. And unfortunately, that is what my story has also, where I was accessed, and I was taken, and a few of my children were taken to some of these really, really awful ceremonies where they used me as the example of what a mother shouldn't do. Look at her. She's just sitting here watching you. Now, I'm deeply drugged. I can't do anything. I can't function, but I'm there in the room. They're hurting these children, terrorizing these children, and they're pointing at me saying, what kind of mother is that? And it doesn't even have to be my own children. It would be any children that they would have there. It's just, I'm in this position as a mother that they can point to and they can say, you don't want that, you don't trust that, and come over here, let's take you over here and do this. I'm going to jump into that because people have been asking. There was a as an adult, it makes me so angry. This makes me angry, mama bear, right? You want to protect your kids. But until I started really this journey of healing when I was 37, and I had all of my babies when I was 33. I have 6 children, and I started having children when I was 23. So within 10 years, I had 6 children, and they were all accessible at whenever, I can't say how often, but I did have this one particular training or experience that had Peter Pan training in it. So Disney is really involved with this. We weren't even in Disneyland, but it had a Disney overlay of the Peter Pan programming. And the way this started, my parents are involved, but my husband was off to work. I had 2 children at the elementary school, and I had some, my youngest hadn't been born yet, so I was in my early 30s. Is up for breakfast. My mom had already made some breakfast, and she's like, here you go, here's breakfast, and here's some drink, whatever it is. And I ate it, and we were just sitting there chatting. I started to feel really, really, really like tired and kind of loopy. And so basically I was drugged, and my dad was, there and present, and he started talking to the other kids, and he's like, do you guys want to go to Neverland? Do you want to go off to Neverland, kind of idea? And we all knew the movie because we were raised on Disney movies, and they'd been playing the movie and that kind of thing. And the younger kids, these really young ones, and there was a baby also. The baby wasn't drugged, didn't need to be, but the younger ones were drugged. We all got into my car, which was a Suburban. So they're taking my car, went up to the school and picked up the kids, the other 2 kids. My mom went in and did that and brought them to the vehicle and gave them some gummy bears to eat, which, anyway, why wouldn't you take those? And so then all of us were in this very uncomfortable, terrorized, we were already starting to feel very fearful, because I knew, I was starting to dissociate, and not already, but went to actually this, it was up by BYU. There's ways to get into the underground campus. So just even under the Marriott Center is where they have the basketball games and stuff like that. I mean, there's ways that people can drive in. So there was something up there, a way to drive in. And I'm going to tell you that the I want to call it a campus, but it feels like it's bigger than that. There is a system under that whole campus, and the Provo Temple and the MTC and all of this stuff. It is, again, subterranean. It's like its own organized city that has its own theaters. I can attest to not just my experience on this one, but I know others who have actively not just been taken there, but have been in that space, have worked different avenues, different parts of that. So it's its own circus down there, I got to tell you. But there was this stage, this set that had been created that had everything to do with the pirates and Peter Pan, and I was Wendy. And if you recall in the movie, Wendy was the mother, the one that was trying to be the mother to the Lost Boys, and the pirates were there, and they were fairly terrifying. But the wild thing was that, all the kids are drugged. It wasn't just mine, but the kids are drugged. I'm set over to the side. I can't interact or move. All I can do is watch, because now I've really been drugged. And they continually drug you too, by the way. So it's not like you get one drug and they expect that to last. It's just to get you there. Then you're injected with something. Or you have something sprayed in your face or something like that. Depends on what it is they want, what drug, what the best application is. And in this particular situation, the boys are all kind of disoriented. They're all dissociating. And Peter Pan pops up, and he's like, hey, boys, you want to go to Neverland? You want to be a lost boy? And he starts talking it all up, that kind of thing. And he says, what's great? I just made a deal with Captain Hook that for every one of you that the pirates want, I get gold, right? I get a bag. So it's this really kind of like, what? I thought and so again, they're throwing things off. The pirates come in. And then there is this terrorizing, and it's like they're acting like there's words and there's, they're acting in these things almost like there's an audience. I wasn't aware of an audience. I don't know if it was rehearsal. I don't know if they were just play acting, because some people kind of like cosplay anyway. So it's like, of the adults that were there, do you want to do the Peter Pan version? Cool. We got boys. We got this whole script. Follow along. And so the main people that were talking would have been Peter Pan and the Captain Hook and Mr. Smee, who was also there. And the setup was that the boys ended up being raped. Sorry, Ard. They ended up being hurt by these pirates that were coming in there, and then taken off into the treasure room where they get, the booty. And so whatever they were doing over there. And then I had this interaction with I think it was Peter Pan and Captain Hook, whoever was playing that role, about what kind of mother are you? How could you do this? And all of a sudden I was like kind of coming into this, like, what am I part of this? Like, what do you, like, that was so disorienting because I was just watching. And then they brought the boys back in, and then they said, do you know who's here? There's the Wendy. They said it, the Wendy. There's the Wendy, and the Wendy watched this, and she did nothing. And you know what she's supposed to be? She's supposed to be your mother. And so they're grooming the kids to not trust their moms. They're grooming these boys, specifically for the boys. They're grooming the boys to not trust or not want to, like, be with a mother figure or to trust a mother figure. And I was told before they came back in by this, Captain Hook was like, I'll make you a deal. If you can, whoever you can convince to come with you gets to go with you, scot-free. No questions asked. There's no ties. And so I get thrown into this, I've got to save them mode, because I know now I'm kind of like understanding what's happening. And then that's when they bring the boys back in, and I'm like, you guys have got to come with me. You just got hurt. So I'm trying to actually tell them, remember, they're drugged. And they're kind of looking at me like, whatever. And then Peter Pan shows up and he's like, what's she doing? Don't you want to be in Neverland? This is where all the fun is. Didn't you just have fun a few minutes ago? Because they were off in this other room playing. So remember, segments of terror, then they change it. Now you're having fun. Then they're going to change it again. So you've got these different fragments that are like coming forward and going back, that they're using to really like groom these kids in a trauma situation. And so the hesitation is, there she is, she's saying something. Yeah. What is she saying? And then without even being it, because I made the deal with Captain Hook, right? Peter Pan coming in and saying, she was here the whole time. She watched this what kind of mother would watch this and not interfere? Do you trust anything? I'm telling you, boys, moms are not to be trusted. It was all about this whole relationship with mothers. What you can trust, you can trust, being here forever and playing. You can trust the men, you can trust, whatever is. I even made a deal with Captain Hook. The pirates are nice, or whatever it was that he was saying. And it just kept developing to where they were each given like these rubber hoses, and they use rubber hoses a lot because you can beat somebody with a rubber hose, leave marks, but not leave scars. So that happened to me a number of times. But they're giving it to the boys to come over and beat me. So a couple of the pirates came over and put me on the floor, and the boys were supposed to, just really lay into me, and some of them did it willingly. And again, remember, now they're monitoring the kids, who's got the aggression, who's willing, who's not. Some are like kind of like part of it, not. And it moves into a whole different version. Like, it's kind of like the boys then, the pirates come in, they're cheering, and they're like, hey, let's go back into the treasure room. And then they change the set. And the set was where I needed to be on a bed, and I needed to read the boys' bedtime story. And all I remember is like they brought the boys back in and I'm supposed to read to them, and there's this weird like lighting that's going on, and we keep hearing the sound of the crocodile. And so that's actually bringing up some terror, and the lights would go out, and a boy would disappear, and we could actually see like they created a kind of a crocodile head, and I think somebody was like, operating it behind it, and they would grab the boys and that kind of thing. And they would after each of them were plucked off, there was that led into they took them into a different room, and there was one of the boys that was had been marked as expendable. So there was a pirate ceremony that had to do with murder, and that kind of a sacrifice there. So it was more like, you're part of us. This is what pirates do. Here's what we have to do. So not only are they creating this, and again, it's like, look, she's watching this and she doesn't do anything. She doesn't step in, so that's set in there at a really baseline. So to answer the question about how did I ever get out of it? I was an adult, and I had a very, very huge trigger happen probably about a year or two prior. And I started acting kind of funny. And my dad noticed it, and it had to do with a dream. It was some of the memories were starting to bleed through, and I didn't have anything to connect it to. So, I stopped eating. I thought my husband was going to be taken and killed. Like, there were just some things, like I was showing outward things, like I'd lost a lot of weight, and I was feeling really kind of anxious all the time. There were just a lot of things that were happening. And then I was triggered by, I was at a family gathering for a missionary farewell, and there was a man there that was visiting the family, and he made a comment, not to me, but about me, that was very sexual. And it just, I remember my whole system just shifting, like it just shifted bad. And I went into, like, it's almost like I had this companion part come and land with me. And that, as I've been able to heal and remember and track it back, it's part of that Beta Kitty program. So if you know anything about that, it is a sexualized program that is meant to service men, please men, spy on men, kind of a prostitute kind of part. And that was there. And I felt it, and I was there. So I felt very split, but I also felt very like sick, like super uneasy, and nothing happened there. It's just that based on the dream, and then this other triggering, and then another triggering happened, which was like a few months later, my husband and I decided to sell our house and build another one. And we were looking for a builder, and the builder that we ended up choosing or got lined up with is also part of the cult brotherhood, and was actively part of it. And, I didn't know, he didn't, we didn't know. But we were in the middle of building this house. And I remember I was doing the general work. We actually hired him so that we could use his license, and I was doing all the subcontracting and stuff like that. So I was there on site a lot, and we were at the point where it was dry. We were doing drywall, because I remember the moment, and it had been like months since that other part that I had told you got triggered had kind of stepped into the background, right? Which I was really grateful for. But I was at the house, and the contractor had called me and said, "Hey, can you come over and I got to ask you some questions." Very common, right? And I showed up, and we were going over stuff and kind of wrapping up, and it was just very, very businesslike, very professional. And he came in really close, and he says, "I'm really attracted to you." And he put his hand on my face in a manner that I was so used to from all of my other experiences with in the trainings that he triggered and brought up this part, and I felt it again. I felt this whole thing come, and I had this very real shift, this very real switch. And again, nothing happened right then, but the loyalty that gets called up when certain signals and certain words and apparently it had been fed to him and given to him, because they use a lot of different ways to track people. Anyway, I've been able to understand what happened in that whole dynamic that was kind of this parallel thing that was going on in my life along with all of this other stuff. So again, I'm giving you guys this information because there's layers on ways that they ensure tracking their victims. And this was one layer, right? And at the end of building the house, I had that part realized and recognized that I was not going to be involved with this handler anymore. And that's what triggered me into this really huge depression. All I knew is that I was really depressed. And so the depression is what got me into a position to start asking questions like, what is going on? I don't know myself this way. I'm really confused. I wasn't making any connections to anything. I just knew that I was really depressed. And it was showing. The apathy was huge. It was really alarming to me, but I couldn't do anything about it and I couldn't control it. Anyway, I ended up sharing this with a friend, and she said, you know, I've been wondering what's wrong. She goes, I have the phone number and a name of a therapist, and he only takes like word of mouth. Maybe you want to talk to him. So she gave me the phone number, and I was absolutely adamant that I was not going to do that because I had been programmed and conditioned to never talk to a therapist or anything like that outside of anybody that was recommended to me by the system, aka my dad. Let me give you some background on that one. This is important. My dad was in hospital administration. When you have access to people in the hospital, and the whole hospital system is infiltrated, but in a lot of different ways. But back when I was when we moved to Ogden, so 5th grade, my dad, we lived behind the McCady Hospital in Ogden. The hospital I'm talking about has since been torn down. The elementary school that I went to in the same area has since been torn down, so you can't go back and find it. But I went, I found our house and kind of got myself oriented to it again. But what would happen is my dad would just kind of show up. And this is one of the things a lot of times people like in the system will do. They just kind of show up and knock at your door. Hey, we just want to visit, right? And you're just kind of like, didn't invite you. Oh my gosh, I got to rearrange my day for you, right? And that's not just as necessarily a people-pleasing thing. It is part of one of the ways, at least, that worked on me to keep me off balance and to keep me in the program. And so it started, always when I was young, and he would show up and he's like, hey, do you want to go to lunch today? And of course, I'm like, yes, I want to go to lunch. Yes. So we were able to walk from the elementary school to the hospital because it was walkable. And instead of taking me in through the front doors, he'd take me in through the back. And back in those days, it was kind of a little, you had to have a key or you'd punch the numbers. And it was mechanical. It wasn't, cards or anything like that. And we went in through the back door, but he took me through the morgue. And which was weird. And he was telling me, this is where the dead people are. Now, I got to tell you that I already knew that because I had had a ceremony that had happened in the morgue anyway, it was a sensory deprivation situation. And it wasn't just me, it was a bunch of kids. That was terrifying. That I thought I was like, that one we can go into. That was awful. It was bad. Anyway, so it was kind of like, walk me through there to remind me, because it does, you get reminded when you're in places, and even if you don't consciously remember, the subconscious part does. So that's part of the setup. And then we went up the elevator, and instead of going right to the cafeteria, we walked down this back hallway, and anyway, we did these other things, and he punched some numbers, and then we walked through the psych ward. And I remember being so disturbed because there were people sitting in wheelchairs drooling. There were people, like kind of banging on doors, and it was just weird. And he said to me, this is where people come who tell. And he made it known in a very real way that if you look outside of this is where you're going to end up. And I was just like, I want nothing to do with this. Let's just get to lunch. I want some chocolate milk. That's what was going on in me. And it was just a casual walk through. He didn't point anything out. He just said the thing. And then we went to, and I was just like, went from the trauma into now I'm, feeling better. And I got to also say that they use sugar to pull you out of one state and, into another. So always the ceremonies, you're going to be given something. Typically it's like a sweet punch because, who doesn't want to drink that as a kid? But as soon as the ceremonies are over, you're given a sucker, or you're given a piece of candy, or you're given something, because the sugar does something, like it works with the brain in a different way too, to pull you out of that state. So I was more than happy to have some, whatever I had. I don't even remember what I had. I just wanted chocolate milk. But things like that were set up enough times in my grooming that to talk to a doctor, and I had plenty of experiences where a doctor showed up, so guy in a white lab coat, stethoscope, whatever, and you're being tortured, right? Electrodes put on your back, electrodes put inside of you. I've had cattle prods anally put up me where they would turn those off and on, telling me to pray. There was one specifically about pray to your God, where is he, kind of idea. And praying would be you'd be tortured. If you're not praying and God doesn't show up, you're tortured. It's your fault, right? Where's God? Where is he? And again, it kind of reflects back to what I was talking about earlier, because that torture would be removed when somebody acting as Lucifer, or one of the men in charge, or one of the group, would show up and say for it to end, right? So again, that bondage, or bonding and bondage are happening in this very real psychological way. So again, to answer the question, I did not want to call the therapist. And I was in such an awful place one day that I couldn't stand it. And I thought, I gotta call this guy. I gotta call this guy. I gotta do something. And so the phone number was right in front of me, and I picked up the phone and I dialed my dad instead. And so understanding the way the mind works in that one is like, you're going to report to your handler, and you're going to talk to the person you trust the very most before anything else. And so I was in that desperate state. And so even with the phone number, that's not the phone number I dialed. I dialed my dad. And I said, hey, can we go to lunch? I've got some stuff I need to talk to you about. I'm really, really like not in a good way. And his response is, yes, your mom and I are just getting on the cruise ship in Florida. We'll be back in 10 days and let's get together then. And I'm like, okay. And I hang up the phone and I'm like, I can't wait 10 days. So that's what made it. So I called the therapist, and I got in with him, answered his questionnaire really quickly with all of the, the setups. And he's looking at it going, wow, yeah. And I said, well, do you think we could work together? And I'm thinking we're working on depression, which we are, but I didn't know. I had no idea what I was looking at yet. And I said, how long is this going to take? Because I don't want anybody to know. And he goes, well, let's give it a couple of months and see what happens. Well, what I heard was, you'll be cured in a couple months. And I thought, cool, I can afford that, right? I had enough in my savings. I didn't have to tell my husband. I didn't have to tell anybody. Nobody had to know. And I started doing therapy. And because I was so ready to express, to remember, the first memory that came out was that baby blessing that I told you about with the blood. And I thought it was symbolic. I'm like, gosh, this is weird, right? And it took a couple of things for me. It took about a month or two for me to actually go, oh, this is a thing? Like, this is a deal? Oh, no. So even as a person that's going through this and actively healing, I ended up telling my husband, I'm like, okay, this thing is going on and I'm going to need some money for therapy now. And that was a whole conversation that we had to have. But I stayed loyal to my therapy. I think I can count on one time, or not, sorry, I can count on one hand the number of times that I ended up having to miss a therapy in a week because we were out of town or something like that. And I was in therapy for a good 8+ years. The thing that I did when I was in therapy, though, is I had this internal organization that would happen, that when I would drop in, relax, and allow what my inner children wanted to show me, because I was very willing to like be present and to do everything I could to believe what was happening in front of me. The thing that would reinforce it is the body memories. A lot of times I would start out with a body memory. I had a really bad one that was in my hip, and I'm like, I feel like I've got like a needle in my hip, and that went on for like, even when I wasn't in therapy, I had this hip pain that was really crazy until I got the whole memory. And then it's like, oh, that's what that was. And it just, it all dissipated, it released, and I basically integrated that memory. So it's to say that you don't necessarily forget the memories, you just release the trauma connected to it, the trapped emotions, the trapped body memories, and all of the anxiety, all of the things that are connected to it. So I can speak about it now and not be triggered by it. I can help individuals going through the same thing and not be triggered by their experiences because I have done so much work on myself. And as I continue doing my work, which I'm doing, if I do get triggered, I actually know how to recognize it and go back into it and see what kind of work I need to do that's what's coming up, right? So I'm in a more self-observational space, which is knowing myself even more, right? So that's how I got out of it. I wasn't easily released. They'd put a lot of time and energy into me. I was being groomed to be part of that higher group in Salt Lake. I was being like trained to be in a programmable, like in a pool of women that could be selected from for particular callings or committees or whatever. Tom Monson was going to personally, like I remember the training of the phone call, the keywords that was going to set off that cascade of timing for me on that one. And although I remember the training and what it was supposed to be and what I was supposed to respond to, I ended up exiting faster than that training came in, or that signal came in. I think they were waiting for him to, I don't know what it was, but I started healing sooner. And as somebody that goes through this healing process and the recall of what really did happen and the relief that comes from that and the healing physically and emotionally and the whole the kind of the way that you end up presenting differently to yourself, even like you become more self-actualized. Your one of the biggest things that I had to really address was external authority. The training to submit was as simple as I don't know the answer to that, and obviously somebody does, so therefore they are now the authority and I'm not. I mean, very, very simple things like that. It gets higher and it gets deeper, but I would always default. My husband knows best, the leadership knows best. Like, I really didn't have a lot of self-propelled decision making without getting approval from other people or my dad. Other people would have to be people that I viewed as an authority, though, like an advisor or so, and hierarchy in people's labels or something like that. So addressing authority has been a really important thing. Self-trust, it's got longevity, that like the lack of self-trust and decisions that we have to make in our lives. it's sometimes, we don't know where anything's going. And they played on that. They played on that with God. God's not telling you what's going to happen. God's not giving you the answers, but you know what we can promise you? We can promise you wealth. We can give you everything. We can promise you safety. You're part of a group. And they have this list of what, if you stay loyal to the family, you stay in the group, they can guarantee certain things are going to be part of your life. It's going to be easy for you. And so when you've got this juxtaposition of faith versus certainty, of walk a good life because that's good enough, that doesn't hold a candle to the trauma, the terror, and the promises over here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm curious with you saying that then about family.
Mm-hmm.
What are your relations with your family members like now? And are they out, or are some of them still in?
Oh no, they're still in. My relationship has gone through a very interesting cycle. When I realized, it was probably about 6 months into therapy, when I realized that my dad was my handler, who my perpetrators were, that this was a real thing. It dawned on me. It's like, oh my gosh, like they know things about me that I don't know. And then the next thought was, what if I have code words? What if they like call me and there's like a tone, like I started to get kind of like, like spy-esque, a lot of James Bondish kind of things. And I was like, oh, that scares me because I don't know what my experience is. And if I stay in contact with them, that could be curated. And I don't know what information they're going to get out of me. I don't know if I'm going to remember. Like this whole thing started coming about, and I was realizing I had to break away from my family. So what that looked like was me taking a few sessions to get the courage up, because honestly, I was so trained that to not break away. I was trained that if my dad died, I would die. And I felt that way. He was my life. He was my hero. He was everything to me. And yet he was my handler, right? So I would shake, like this idea of telling them that I was going to step away from the family. I really, at the time, I had no idea that meant this massive institution where I was leaving the family, kind of like in a whole mafia setting, like, and they don't let you go, right? And I hadn't got the memory yet that I'd been demonstrated to over and over and over that I'll tell you about. A very good indicator one. So I didn't really understand that I was battling something that massive. I just was scared to death. So I had to craft a letter. It was not a long one. And I was going to do it on the phone so that I had the power to hang up if I needed to. Like I really tried to create a setting where I was going to be like in control of it, because I wasn't sure what would happen if I was going to be face to face, or, it was just too much of this is a little wild. So I crafted this letter, gave them a call, asked them both to get on the phone. I actually had my husband with me. I remember him standing there. I really needed his support. And it was basically a very calm letter saying, hey, I just want you to know I'm going through a really hard time right now. And I've got to take some steps for myself. I'm doing I don't think I used the word self-care, but it was kind of along those lines. And I was basically like, so what that looks like is we're not showing up to any family events. We're not going to, I'm not doing this. And you are also not invited to be attending these. Like, basically, I was like, here's the boundaries. And that's the way it is. And when, you anticipate the questioning, well, why, what's going on, all of that stuff. All I did was commit to myself to only say what was on that letter. I'm just going through a hard time right now. I know it's confusing. I'm not going to be able to be involved. I just stayed in that dialogue because that script was what I could rely on, understanding that they have their own scripts. They thrive on misinformation, on disinformation, on confusion. And all I was going to do was not open a conversation, but I'm going to be right here. So I ended up stepping away from my family for 20 years. It was radio silence. I dropped off the planet. They sent people in looking for me. And this relationship that I was telling you about with the builder and that kind of thing, that was one of the ways they kept tabs on me, because they knew that he was involved with, the cult. And so there were still ways that they could see, but they weren't necessarily privy to exactly how well I was diving into memories and how much it was actually helping me, because I wasn't really sharing anything with anybody. It was pretty clear from my therapist, it was like, keep this to yourself, because he had gone through the threats himself. Like, he had it on his own history of having to go underground, having his life threatened, the whole Utah satanic panic, the satanic panic, he was very, very privy to, very aware of. And I knew nothing about any of this. So that late 80s, early 90s, I didn't see him to 2003. So that was fresh on the heels of it. And everybody in the state, particularly, I don't know where it was outside of the state, was in this uproar about what it was. And then, let's enter in false memory syndrome foundation. Won't that be nice and tidy? And it was completely created to funnel the public away from the truth of what people were actually remembering. What that false memory syndrome has actually effectively done is silence children, because they're like, oh, they can't remember, which is not true. They can remember very well in a lot of detail. And it took away the power from anybody that had memories that, so as soon as your handler dies, typically then you feel more safe. And so you're going to be later in age and you're going to come up with some of these memories. And so it took their voice away. And because they had such a strong case and so much money behind it and so much of a design in the mass, like they were in Good Morning America, for heaven's sakes. You know what I'm saying? It's like they were really introducing, this is a thing and we're going to really support it. It's now, like accepted that that's a thing. It's in, psychologists are like, oh yeah, it's this. And they even in that therapy, psychological world, there's a division of practitioners of SRA does not even exist. Don't even go there. And it's being fed by something else. And then there's others that are like, yeah, we actually know it's real. We have clients that are coming up with this and we don't have a lot of help, or we just kind of keep it quiet and secret. And so for the grace of God, I was actually directed to this guy that happened to be a specialist in it. And I had no idea what SRA was even. And there wasn't even a mention of what that was. One of the first things that he gave me was the PACE memo. And I was reading through that. And that's a very, very LDS, very Mormon expose kind of investigative thing that people can look up and find. But I read that and it helped, but I was still kind of like, I'm not too sure what all of this is, but I got very good at bringing everything up. And from where I am, I would get words and locations and names and people and settings that was really important for my own healing, but I also feel important for what it is that I want to present. So I've got in front of me, I've got some of the things that, of the books of my sessions. I wanted to share this one because it gives you an idea how the religion and the mind control kind of overlap each other. So before I do that, though, I just wonder, if there's any questions, or where are we on timing, that kind of thing.
So we're into the third hour. You've got hundreds of questions.
Okay.
There's not going to be enough time.
Okay.
It take hours and hours and hours to do all the questions.
Sure.
So let's just get to the end of the story, and then perhaps we could bring you back for part 2 to answer all the questions.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. All right, so I'm in a particular situation where they're doing a training on me particularly, and they've got a set up to where I'm kind of I'm really confused about what's happening. So they're doing some things physically to me. I've eaten, or I've been drugged, and so there's something going on with my throat that's causing me to cough, and it's like creating this idea that I'm smothering or choking. But in addition to what's happening, and this is what's important whenever anybody's trying to do healing, it's so important to get the words, because when you're in that state, the words are going in. Whether you're comprehending it or not, the words are going in. And so this is what they count on. And so they create this sense of distress and trauma in what it is. But anyway, so I said, they gave me a capsule earlier. When it dissolves, it's going to like kind of expand in my gut, and then I'm going to throw it up because there's also some kind of ipecac kind of thing with it. So it's a natural thing. So there's going to be something that wasn't in my stomach and then was, and I'm going to bring this out. And so it sounds funny, but what they actually were doing was like, I threw this thing up, and they're kind of like, quick, grab it. And they're like, this is your soul. So this is what they said to me. Your soul is all you have. It's all you come to earth with. And it's your soul we want. It's the very means to control every human on earth. And we are capturing them one by one, holding them hostage, taking them prisoner. We will capture all of God's children. We own more than the third that followed us to earth. We own more than 2/3, in fact. We own almost all the souls on earth. There's only a few left to capture. Today, it's yours we will take. There's a special way that we can do this, and you can do nothing about it. It's an entrapment, a snare, a cage. There's nothing you can do to prevent or stop it. We've perfected it. It's flawless. It's a flawless means of capturing souls and maintaining control. We're going to show you how it works. We start from the inside out. So now I've already had this inside out experience. So viscerally, they're speaking truth to me, right? Let's see. There's no way out but through. That's one of the phrases. We have vaults in various places, and we are the ones that hold the keys. They're all locked and stored here. There's no way to get out of this. It's inevitable. You must, if you want to live past this life, this is how you do it. God has his hands tied. We hold all of his souls hostage. There's no way to get back to him except through us. He can't help you. We have too much power. Do you know where you are? Do you know how far down you are? You are in the gut, the belly of the earth, under the temple so deep that even God can't see you. Your soul can't ascend through the layers of dirt and concrete. You're already entombed, and we have the power to keep you here. No soul is free. It was bought with a price, and we're ransoming that price. Soon we'll have the souls of everyone that has ever been born. Your choice is to be ransomed with the others or stay entombed forever. Let's see. It's like they've created this face-off with God, like a face-off. This is me actually making a comment. The face-off between Lucifer and God the Father. If he wants any of the souls, any of his children back, he'll have to pay for it, and he'll have to grant Lucifer the thing he asked for in the beginning, and that was the glory of God's throne. He's holding all of the world's souls for ransom to force God's hand, to make God step down. God will have to step down, and your choice is to be ransomed with the others, to be entombed forever. Most people see the simplicity of it. They had a chance to choose, and they have a chance to choose now. The irony is, either way, Lucifer wins. If you choose his plan, he has your soul. If you come to earth, he has your soul. Sooner or later, he has your soul. There's no choice. So they've hampered my ability to reason. I'm not in a position where I could do any of that. And basically, it keeps going on to where they get me to a position where they say, and the life that you save by doing this may be that of your own. So now they're showing me children. It's kind of like they turn me around and here's these children. So are you going to offer your soul for their lives? And I'm actually saying, yes, now I'm doing this of my own free will. And so they're like, so you're actually selling your soul to us so these children could live? And I say, yes. Do you know what you're doing? I say, yes. You're choosing to give us your soul? Yes. And I say that. And he says, so they will live? I say, yes. Are you sure? I say, yes. Do you see the pattern here? Like, I'm trying to save these children, and then I'm giving up my soul to them. So even more concrete evidence that they can hold over me is to say, you chose us, and you betrayed Jesus, and you're not choosing God. So in essence, that's just kind of what I wanted to give an overview of. Is it's just a very, it's like this cycle that just keeps you bound. And in order to really get what it is to free any of us, and I'm talking about deep, deep trauma, and I'm talking about you didn't have this in your life and you still have trauma because life has traumatizing things in it. The thing you need to actually access and look at is, what was your perception in that moment? And how did that frame your worldview? Because that's what anchors in, and that's what gets lodged there while your trauma brain is on. And once that closes down, your regular, your frontal lobe is actually what we function with. The subconscious is still driving that. It's still creating this framework through emotions or anything else that's lodged back in there. So when you are going in and you're actually trying to heal from something this traumatic, getting the situation and getting the words are what's showing you everything. It shows the lies, it shows how you're being tricked, and it shows you how you actually formed what it is that you're thinking or punishing yourself or whatever. So there again, as you go through a healing process, and that's what I feel like there's a lot of hope there, because we are moving into just this whole phase of self-observation, self-understanding, and kind of seeing things more on what's out there and questioning it. But the real work is going within and really working there. And that's what I love helping people with. That's what my goal is just to meet you where you are and have that ability and space available for you to walk. Sometimes it's a very long, arduous path, because there's so many weird, things that you might have to experience, especially with SRA, body memories, emotions, assumptions, fears, recorder parts, all of these things. And it's an organized menagerie that's within, and you got to trust it, and you got to stick with it. That's what I want to say, and that's what I want to share.
Oh my God. The story has been harrowing, breathtaking. The level of detail, you just tell stories so well. I've just sat here on the edge of my seat, and so many of the viewers, it's just all love and support for you. I've put your website in the live chat right now, so if people want to connect with you. A few people were mentioning how beautiful your jewelry is as well.
Thank
you. You got the jewelry design website. I'll get that one down there as well. You got a BitChute channel. You got your Letters to the People podcast. You got your Instagram. All those links are in the description box. Would love to get you back to to do the questions and stuff.
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion to the viewers?
I want to thank you for giving us some room. I want to thank the viewers for just opening up. Like, this is a gradual process. It was gradual for me, and I was in it, right? It's gradual to understand or to be open to this level of depravity that has been running the planet for centuries, like for a very, very, very long time. This has been present. So I just want to say, it's not a negative thing to think that they're really refined. They really understand the biological functions of people, what hormones are going to run through you when you're traumatized, what shock looks like, how long it's going to last, how they can funnel you and get those kinds of things. So one of the best ways you can actually help yourself is to just take a breath and pause before you even respond, to react to anything, and just kind of get an orientation of, I'm feeling really aggravated right now. And don't even put it out there like, so-and-so is really making me mad. It's just like, I am noticing these feelings. That takes a lot of that power back, even if it's for a moment. And the more that you guys, like that we as a collective focus on not necessarily the out there, but say, okay, I see the out there, and this is what is available to me to maybe use as a mirror, or maybe to recognize and do some self-observation. And all you have to do is observe. You don't have to do anything about it. You just have to recognize that there's something to watch in yourself that is going to educate you. And I think the more we do that, there's so much power that lies in that pretty soon the lies that are out there, you're going to be looking at like, whatever, like what, this is how you starve the beast, right? The beast is out there. You just stop giving it its energy by giving the energy here. And it comes in increments. You don't just do it overnight, right? So thank you guys. I just thank you so much. And be patient with me. I'm a one-woman show. I've been supporting myself through jewelry. Now I'm stepping into coaching more fully. I'm back on the circuit with doing some more podcasts, and I'm building my website myself. So it's like, it's sparse, but it's coming back. And I have an interview with somebody about false memory syndrome that I'm going to put on my podcast here in the next little bit. So that's going to be something new. So just keep revisiting, check it out. And Sean, I would love to come back on and be here for questions. That's one of the places that I feel like I can really have that interaction, and we can really connect and search and see what it is you guys are actually wondering about. And I would love to be part of that. So thank you.
Absolutely. We appreciate all the time you spent with us today. I've just got a legal requirement on my channel. I have to ask you for legal reasons. Do you give us permission to publish your story, and do you waive your anonymity for that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Viewers, you've been phenomenal. Thank you for all your love and support. And we hope to see you for the part 2. I'm going to close the show and let you go. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Cheers. Thank you. Thanks. Wow. Absolutely mind-blowing, folks. I know you know you're all eager. So many questions came in, and thank you for that. Thank you for supporting our guest and giving them a safe space to tell these stories in. Phenomenal support by you, the viewers. And let me have a look what else is coming up this week. We've got Kevin Annette coming back on Saturday, 7 p.m. UK. He's going to tell his backstory. It's been a while since we did the first episode of him, about 5 or 6 years ago. And then we have got MK Ultra program and Epstein Start Network with guest Chase Hughes coming up at some point. And Shane has just put up retired Colonel Wilkerson. He's going to come on to talk about World War III. So we had him on last year for another really great guest. All right, I'm going to go and take baby Ziggy to the park before it gets dark here in the UK. But thank you for tuning in, folks. I hope to see some of you in the next stream. Take care.